Have you ever seen something really incredible or amazing and decided to take credit for it yourself instead of making sure people knew who really did it or what really happened? You've kind of decided, I think this is pretty awesome and nobody saw who did it, so I did it, right? Take a minute and share any experiences like that if you're willing to be honest with each other. Have any of you done that before, taken credit for something that really wasn't you at all, but it was somebody else or just an accident? So talk about that with each other just a little bit if you're brave enough to share any examples. So hopefully some of you were able to share some stories about maybe taking credit or making it all about ourselves like we do a lot of times, maybe when we shouldn't have at all. We're going to read Daniel. We're picking up in Daniel chapter 2. So flip there and pause the video and read verses 24 through 30 and then look at the way two people handle the situation. What does Arioch claim? It's a weird name. What does Arioch claim? And then who does Daniel give credit to? So read Daniel 2, 24 through 30. What does Arioch claim and who does Daniel give credit to? So Daniel, he knows what's going on straight away. He doesn't try to say, oh yes, I have these amazing gifts of dream interpretation. I'm the best. I can figure this out, no problem. That's not what he does. He immediately says that Yahweh can do this. Now, put this in perspective again. Remember, Daniel and his friends, the Israelites, they're in exile. This Babylonian Empire came in, took them over. This was at a time where it really spoke about, it was kind of like a battle between gods. So Yahweh lost, was beaten, was destroyed in the eyes of all these other nations. We know because of the Old Testament and what God said, he didn't lose. He handed over the Israelites because of their rebellion and sin, right? But from the perspective of the rest of the world, it looks like Yahweh is a weak, worthless God who was beaten. He was destroyed. His nation is scattered among the whole area. So who cares about Yahweh? But Daniel and his friends still cling to the truths they learned about God. And Daniel falls back on those now. And he says, I can't do this, but our God can. And he's the only one that can. Now, put that into perspective about what Arioch says. And Arioch, he claims, he's like, yes, King Nebuchadnezzar, I found this man who can interpret your dream. And aren't I wonderful? Like, did he actually find him? No, Daniel came to him and said, hey, I can do this for you. And Arioch's like, oh, great, well, come on, let's hurry up. And he's trying to maybe get a promotion or like get a bonus or make the king happy with him. So he's taking credit for something he had nothing to do with at all. Just a interesting little side note there, and we will come back to Arioch as well. But so often, we do the same thing that Arioch does, and we try to glorify and make it all about ourselves. But we see that Daniel doesn't. He makes it about what God can do through him and what God, his abilities, his characteristics, his attributes. And when we do that, when Daniel does that, he brings glory to God. Instead of people looking at Daniel and how incredible he is, Daniel wants them to see how incredible his God is, Yahweh, the Lord. That's a pretty good idea. Pretty good idea. This makes people, like we talked about last week, this is going to make Daniel stick out. He's going to look like that weirdo rodent with a leaf on its head. He's going to be different. We live in a world where people vie for credit and attention. And Daniel says it's God, not himself. And it's going to make him look different. So Daniel goes to the king and he interprets the dream. So read Daniel 2, verses 31 to 45 now, and then retell it in your own simplified way. So pause it, read Daniel 2, 31 to 45, then retell that in your own simplified way. What is going on? This is weird. Obviously, we see why the king was disturbed by this dream. A giant statue made of all this different stuff, and then this meteorite smashes into it and destroys everything. Okay, great, that's so good. So there's such a strong temptation in when we study these things and when we research these things to try to figure out and sort out, okay, all these different levels and types of the statue represent different kingdoms, and let's figure out who they are and what's going on here. We see that a lot, and we can speculate till we're blue in the face. But quite frankly, the only one we know for sure is what God tells Daniel, is what Daniel says. That's all we know for sure. So people speculate that the first one is Babylon, and then the next one is Media, and then the next one is Persia, maybe the next one is Rome, but then what are the 10 toes? And so then maybe the second one is actually Media and Persia together, but then Rome is after that, but then we still don't know who the 10 toes are, and maybe there are 10 different kingdoms. It doesn't matter. That's not the point of the dream. God didn't give this dream to the king so that the King Nebuchadnezzar would have this prophetic vision of the future and know all of these kingdoms and the order that they will take place in, and then when this meteorite will come out of the heavens and destroy them all. That wasn't his goal. That's not the point of this dream, to figure out the details of prophecy. The point is, God wanted to make a point to King Nebuchadnezzar that all earthly kingdoms are transient. They're all gonna go with the wind. They're all gonna be toppled over. They're all gonna crumble. They're all gonna fade away. And ultimately, the only thing that will last is the kingdom of God. And that's represented by this uncut stone that falls out of the sky. So I want you to write next to Daniel chapter 2, verses 44 and 45. I want you to write a couple references. Revelation 11:15, and then also Luke 20. Can I read that? 22. Nope, 27 and 28. I hope that's right. Luke 20, verses 27 and 28. Write those references there at the end of that dream. Because we see in those references how it's God's prerogative to give and grant authority to governments. We see that, you can write another one in there too, Romans 13:1. We see that it's God who gives authority to governments. He sets them up, and it's up to him to tear them down when he wants to. That's the way it is. He's really clear about that in those verses. And then ultimately it is his kingdom that is going to be established. So Jesus started that kingdom when he came to earth, gave up his life, lived out the gospel. He started that kingdom. Jesus said it over and over again. The kingdom is at hand. It is coming. And we know that that kingdom will be fulfilled and established and finalized when he returns. I am excited about that because the older I get, the more I see how broken and frustrating and hurtful the world is because of our own sin and my own sin. I am ready to move on to a better kingdom that doesn't have this brokenness in it. And this is the kingdom that is being prophesied about in the king's dream. So now let's see how the king responds to this dream. Read Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, and what is the king's response? So pause and do that now. What a response, right? He has a dream. clearly laying out how not only will his kingdom eventually come to ruin, but all these other kingdoms will come to ruin. So what's Nebuchadnezzar's response? He builds a giant gold statue and commands everyone to worship it because he wants his kingdom to last forever. Let's take a look at this for a second. So, that's last week. Spoiler alert, animals is so cute still. So he builds this ridiculous statue. It says it's 90 feet tall. Who knows if that perspective is right? Well, it's not. But the point is, he builds this statue right after he just had this really intense dream from God saying that your kingdom is limited. He's like, nah, I don't think so. And so he does this, right? And commands everybody to worship it. Ugh, I'm probably the same way. Let's be real. So, here's something interesting. Pause the video and read Genesis chapter 11, verse 2. So now that you've done that, what did you notice any similarities between where the Tower of Babel was built and where this thing was built? It seems to be described as the same place, this plain of Babylon. Isn't that interesting? So here we have quite a bit of time later, hundreds of years later, another people group, another king, is building something in defiance of what God has told them. Because the king built this to make a name for himself and to unify his kingdom forever and to try to make his own way last for eternity. That's the same thing that people were doing earlier in Genesis when they built the Tower of Babel. In direct defiance of God, they were trying to make a name for themselves, and they were trying to be unified and stay together forever, when God specifically told them, I want you to spread out and fill the earth. And they're like, nah, we're going to build this tower instead. It'll be great. We know how that worked out. I think we can guess eventually how this is going to work out too. We've already seen the facts from the dream, right? So this is what Nebuchadnezzar does. The king set this up to make a name for himself, to make himself into his own version of a god, to get everyone to look at him, to worship him, to see how awesome he thinks he is. Flash back to the beginning of this lesson, Arioch does the same thing. He doesn't set up a golden statue, he doesn't have those resources, but he takes credit for something that's not his. When we're honest with ourselves, we do the same thing. We take credit for things, we want to make ourselves look awesome, not to belittle sports, but isn't that the whole idea of sports? To make yourself look awesome, to be better than everyone else, to show how incredible you are. Isn't that the whole point of competition? Isn't that the whole point of so much of what it even means to be American? Is to draw attention to yourself, make yourself look awesome, and how incredible you are. And it has nothing to do with actually putting the perspective and drawing attention to God and His glory. So here's what I want us to spend some time talking about. How do we do this? How do we live a life that reflects God's glory instead of always pointing back to ourselves? It's so easy to do. We do this all of the time, every day. The way we talk, we make sure if someone says something that we think is a little bit wrong, well, it's actually this. I can't believe you're that dumb that you thought that. Like that's making ourselves look good and putting them down. We do this so often every day without even considering it. So what would it look like to take ourselves off the throne of our life, to take down our own golden statues that we've erected of ourselves, and to put God, to put Yahweh in His proper place on the throne in our hearts and in our lives, where He is the focus of who we're living for. He's the one that we want people to see when they see our lives. Because in the long run, does it matter if everyone in the world knows how awesome Nick Deck is and how incredible I am? Nope, because I can't do anything to save them. I've got nothing. When I'm dead and gone, that's it. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is pointing people towards Yahweh, pointing people towards Christ, helping them find a relationship with God. That's what matters. Not us, because I'm the same broken, flawed human that everybody else is. So take time to talk about this and be real with each other about how much we struggle with making ourselves into our own golden statues, and how can we put God in his proper place of worship and focus in our lives. Thanks everybody. See you next week.